The Lyft driver who picks you up might be getting cheated out of some of the money that you're paying for the ride.
Yep, fed-up drivers reached out to NBC5 for some help, and Samantha Chapman is now in studio to tell us what happened.
Good morning to you, Deborah and Mark. You know, we talked to dozens of Lyft drivers who said they're not being paid what Lyft promised them. So we started digging around, and we found their claims seem to be spot on. Ryan Bleeker has been driving for Lyft for more than 2 years. He says he's been happy, but he admits it's not an easy living.
I'm struggling to make this work full time. I wasn't sure if my house payment was going to clear this month.
Brian gets paid per ride. He thinks Lyft pays him the rider fare, minus a 20% cut that Lyft takes. He says that's what he agreed to when he signed up. But Brian recently heard rumblings that Lyft wasn't being upfront about what it's charging riders. So he asked some of his riders to help him investigate.
I was totally floored that it didn't match. It didn't make any sense.
Look what he told us he found. A rider paid Lyft $22.16 for a ride, but the fare Lyft reported to Brian was $17.78. Another ride, Lyft charged the rider $48.46, but Lyft told Brian the rider paid just $35.47. Lyft is paying Brian based on a fare that's lower than what it's charging the rider. Brian says Lyft is pocketing money that should be his and also duping the rider, leading them to believe the driver is paid based on the fare they paid.
I'm overwhelmed that this is happening.
We heard this story from dozens of Lyft drivers who feared retaliation by the company if they spoke to us. So the response team took some rides to see what we'd find. And sure enough, time and time again, the fare Lyft reported to the driver was lower than what we paid, usually by a buck or two.
They're breaching their deal. They're being deceptive. They're being misleading.
Attorney Steve Mashal accuses Lyft of deceiving drivers and shorting their paychecks. He filed a class action lawsuit claiming Lyft is secretly making two fare calculations per ride. One determines what riders pay, and the second determines what drivers are paid. Mashal says the driver formula is almost always lower.
Those monies go into the coffers of Lyft that should go into the pockets of the hard-working drivers who are trying to make a living, doing rides and providing a service to customers.
Mashal says Lyft is hiding the fare discrepancy and that it should be clearly disclosed in its contracts with drivers. He says Lyft recently made the fare calculations more available, but he argues it's still very difficult to find. Mashal wants Lyft to simply pay drivers based on the fare riders pay. Brian and other drivers we talked to want to see the same.
There has to be some retribution. I mean, some fairness to it.
Now, Lyft did not respond to our repeated phone calls and emails for this story, but it has filed a motion to dismiss the case, Mark and Deborah, and I'm sure a number of riders out there wondering if the drivers are being reported a cheaper fare, why am I not being charged a cheaper fare?
Right.
So a lot of questions still remain on this story.
Okay, we know you've been looking for answers.
Sure will.
Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you.
Last night, I conducted a little bit of a test of my own. My wife was flying in from Arizona, and I picked her up just outside of the airport, and we both drove home, and then we compared our phones and our Uber apps against each other at the end of the ride. Uber charged $17.88, and I got paid after their 25% cut, $13.41. Now, unfortunately, my wife, she got charged $21.29, and there was no discount for the shorter time and the shorter distance that Uber was estimating. You're probably asking, well, what can I do to fight back? Well, there's a few things that you can do. One is simple, stop using Uber.
You drive up to 80 hours a week, but you're treated as a part-time employee. How does that affect you?
Okay. In 2013-14, I was driving 70, 80 hours. And I went to the office, and they said, all the Uber drivers are part-time drivers. I said, excuse me. I worked 80 hours last week, and you tell me I'm a part-time driver. He said Uber policy is to have only part-time drivers, not a full-time driver. I said, then I'm worked 80 hours. You still call me a part-time driver? He said, yes, one of the managers over there. He said all the drivers are part-time drivers. That's how Uber wants. They want every driver to be a part-time driver.
So your income has dropped from $37 an hour to around $9 an hour, and yet you have to pay for gas, you have to pay for car insurance. How much are you spending to be an Uber driver?
To work as an Uber driver, my expenses are average about $10 an hour. okay? And when I make $10 an hour, I'm just meeting my expenses. I'm not taking any money to my house, to myself. To me, this IPO is an exploitation, and if anybody buys this IPO, they are becoming a member of an exploitation. And this is an exploitation of not one driver, two drivers, almost 3 million drivers.
You called this system, you called Uber, Lyft, these other apps, a slave system. Why?
I call Uber and Lyft as a slave system because, as I showed you, I'm getting paid $9, $10 an hour, where my expenses are $10 an hour. You know, literally I went home with a $0 to myself or to my family. That's why I call these companies exploitation and slave drivers.
Finally, you said without the help of your family, you would have been dead like some other drivers. There's been a spike in suicides by drivers here in New York City. Can you talk about that and the devastation that this leads to people's lives?
Okay, I'll tell. Most of these drivers were yellow cab drivers. They took $1 million loan on their medallions, and they could not make the payments, and the banks were foreclosing on their houses and on their accounts. All those things were getting frozen, and they could not take that thing. If you see, 2 years ago, taxi newspapers had no advertisement for suicide help. Today, every taxi newspaper have half a page of ad telling the drivers not to commit suicide. Come to them for help. We don't need help to commit suicide. We need help to make money. What we were making 2 years ago, we want to make same amount of money. This way we are financially and physically and mentally healthy. But today, Uber and Lyft had made a situation we are mentally, physically and financially. All three ways we are getting exploited. We will buy these multi-billion-dollar companies, and we do not have any help from nobody. We do not need a doctor to tell us not to go commit suicide, and we do not need to take a medication for depression. We need to get paid properly what we do. We were getting paid properly in 2013, 14, 15. 17, 18, 19, our income has been dropped by 2/3. And that's why so many drivers are in depression, so many drivers are committing suicide all over the country.